In 2016, Solciret Rodríguez, a mother of two, a feminist, and a university student, vanished without a trace, yet she never truly left. For 3 years, the evidence of her murder was hidden in plain sight inside her own home. The police said she had run away, her partner claimed she had abandoned him, and all the while, the truth was concealed just feet from those who claimed to love her. Stay with us to understand what truly happened. Solciret Melchorita Rodríguez Ibar was born in Peru on March 23, 1993. She was the youngest of three siblings, the daughter of Rosario Ibar and Carlos Rodríguez. From a young age, Solciret felt a strong calling to advocate for human rights. In 2011, after finishing high school, she enrolled in a college preparatory academy. It was there she met twin brothers, 20-year-old Brian Alexander Villanueva Castillo and his brother Kevin. They started as friends, but soon after, Solciret and Brian began a romantic relationship. He wasn't particularly affectionate, but she was drawn to their shared interests and believed that, deep down, he was a good person. In 2012, Solciret became pregnant with her first child. Brian suggested they move in with his parents. She agreed and began living with her in-laws, Yolanda Castillo and Alexander Villanueva, as well as her brothers-in-law Franco and Kevin. While Solciret was making steady progress in her university career and becoming increasingly committed to defending women's rights, Brian's situation was very different. He had dropped out of his studies and was unemployed. When Solciret visited her parents, she would confess to her mother that the relationship was not going well. Brian wasn't contributing financially to their son's care, and it was wearing her down. Despite everything, she continued to fulfill her academic responsibilities and her role as a mother. In 2014, she gave birth to their second child, a daughter. Far from bringing them closer, the arrival of the baby worsened the tensions. Living with Brian's family became more difficult. His pathological jealousy continued, even extending to his own twin brother. And worse, that very brother, according to Solciret, was constantly harassing her. Her mother-in-law, instead of protecting her, blamed her, saying she was the one who was being provocative. The situation became unbearable. On one occasion, her brother-in-law attempted to sexually assault her. Deep down, Solciret already knew she had to end the relationship. On Sunday, August 21st, she spent the day with her mother. They laughed, talked, and enjoyed each other's company as they always did. They made plans to have lunch together on Tuesday, August 23rd. The following Monday, Solciret's mother called to confirm their lunch plans, but her daughter explained they would have to postpone. She had just started a new semester at the university, and between her studies and caring for her children, she was overwhelmed. It was the last time mother and daughter spoke directly. The next day, according to some of Brian's colleagues, he received a phone call. It was supposedly his mother telling him that Solciret had left the house. That night, around 9 p.m., Brian called his wife's parents to tell them she had abandoned him, leaving him alone with the children. Rosario, Solciret's mother, felt that something was wrong. She knew her daughter well. She would never leave her children like that. Without hesitation, she asked Brian if something had happened at his house, but he insisted that nothing had, that she had simply left. Her parents tried to contact Solciret several times, but there was no answer. They called friends and family. No one knew anything about her. The next day, Brian went to the police and reported his partner for abandonment of the home. He presented text messages in which Solciret had supposedly told him she was at the Plaza Norte bus terminal and was planning to run away. The police took the abandonment report without even going to the house to verify the story. Rosario and her husband Carlos went to the terminal Brian had mentioned. But no one there had seen Solciret. They asked their son-in-law to show them the messages she had allegedly sent. 2 days passed with no news. Desperate, the parents went to a police station to report her missing. But the police chief refused to take their report. He told them with an air of confidence that in his experience, Solciret was likely with a friend or relative and would return on her own. Rosario and Carlos couldn't accept that. They posted photos of their daughter online. They asked acquaintances for help. They put up flyers. But the days passed and there was no trace of Solciret. A few days after she disappeared, her father received messages from her phone. They supposedly said she had gone on a trip to clear her head. But as soon as he read the words, he knew it wasn't his daughter writing. The tone, the phrasing, nothing matched her way of expressing herself. Besides, he knew Solciret. She would never leave without her children, nor without telling her parents first. Time passed and their anxiety grew. A week later, on September 1st, the authorities finally accepted the missing persons report. The case was assigned to prosecutor Lucila Aliaga. But in that first month, there was little to no progress. In October, with still no news, the parents returned to the police station. There, a new officer told them they would request the geolocation of Solciret's cell phone and review surveillance cameras near her home, as well as interview her friends. The police requested location data for 3 key days: August 23rd, 24th, and 25th. In November, the prosecutor's office summoned the parents to testify. They repeated what they had said before. Their daughter's relationship with her in-laws was poor, especially with Kevin, the brother-in-law. They accused him of sexually harassing her, even of masturbating in front of her and her children. Rosario recounted that he had once forced open Solciret's bedroom door and touched her inappropriately. When her daughter reported it to her mother-in-law, the response was that she had been provocative. That episode left Solciret in a deep depression for which she sought psychological help. She left her in-laws' house for a while, but Brian convinced her to return, assuring her that Kevin no longer lived there. It wasn't true. 3 months later, he was back. In their testimony, the parents also described the constant disapproval Brian's family showed towards Solciret. They criticized her for studying, working, being an activist, being a feminist. To her mother-in-law, that was not what a woman with 2 children should be. According to her, Solciret should stay at home and let Brian be the sole provider. The authorities also summoned Solciret's mother-in-law to testify, but she refused to appear. She argued that they had already filed a report for abandonment of the home, and maintained that her daughter-in-law had taken money and some belongings. In her view, it was clear that Solciret had run away and that nothing bad had happened to her. Andrea, the girlfriend of Kevin, Brian's twin brother, was also called to testify. She said she had met Solciret through her relationship with the twins and claimed she didn't know where she was. She recounted that on August 23rd, Solciret arrived at the house at noon. A short while later, she heard the 2 children crying. When she went out, she found them alone, standing by the front door. At first, Andrea thought that perhaps Solciret just needed a few days to clear her head. But as time went on, she began to worry. It wasn't normal for her to be gone so long without any news. She said that since then, Brian had been depressed. He had lost weight, and both she and Kevin had neglected their studies to help care for the children, which she claimed was a great responsibility. Meanwhile, when the police reinterrogated Kevin, he stuck to his initial story. He insisted he was at work when his parents called to tell him Solciret had left. He said he arrived home at night after his shift and confirmed that she was indeed not with the children. It was then, he claimed, that he called her parents. Kevin also asserted that the next day his intention was to report Solciret missing, not as a case of home abandonment, but that the police at the station had misunderstood him. When questioned about the parents' accusations of sexual harassment, Kevin admitted that the incident had occurred. However, he added that afterward he and Solciret had a conversation in which she allegedly confessed to having a secret 2-month affair with his twin brother. Solciret's parents never believed this version of events. Even so, the police found a letter on her computer in which she supposedly admitted to the affair. At that point, suspicion began to center on Brian, Solciret's husband. Had he discovered the supposed betrayal and reacted violently? Could he have killed her and hidden the body? The pressure to investigate Brian grew. However, months later, the Division for the Investigation and Search of Missing Persons in Lima presented a report that changed the course of the case. According to this document, Solciret was at a beach in the north of the country. The proof was a set of photos published on her Facebook in 2015, long before her disappearance. The report also claimed Solciret was with a friend named Susanna, but when the police located her, she denied the story. Susanna said that days before Solciret disappeared, she had received messages from her cell phone saying she was coming to visit, but she never arrived. In February 2017, the police received the call log report from Solciret's cell phone. The result was unsettling. The phone had remained in the same area where she lived with Brian's family the entire time. 8 months had passed since her disappearance. In April 2017, authorities conducted luminol tests in the house. The result was negative for blood, though by then the house had already been remodeled. The months dragged on, and although there were some official actions, nothing progressed. A year later, the parents' desperation was total. The police seemed stuck, and they feared they would never know what had happened to their daughter. It was then they decided to take matters into their own hands. They began to spread her case on social media and in the news. They spoke with neighbors, friends, and relatives. They organized marches. They sought support from activists and organizations to continue the search for Solciret. But every effort seemed to lead to a dead end. The case began to resonate throughout the country. 2 years after the disappearance, with no concrete progress, the family publicly denounced a series of irregularities that had stalled the investigation. At least 4 different prosecutors and 6 different police units had been involved in Solciret's case. However, far from supporting the family in their grief, many acted with indifference and instead of moving forward ended up obstructing the investigation. After so many setbacks, a major change occurred in January 2019. Prosecutor Jimmy Mancilla Castaneda took over the investigation. He requested a new release of communication records, but this time with clearer criteria and covering everyone close to Solciret. He also ordered that the young woman's entire family circle be reinterrogated. In March, the case was transferred to the Homicide Division of the Dirincri. There, her relatives were summoned once again. Solciret's mother repeated what she had already stated on previous occasions, but she added a detail that had been ignored before. Months earlier, her grandson had told her he saw his mommy hitting her head and his daddy carrying her out of the house. Rosario insisted she had already reported this to previous authorities, but no one had paid attention. This time, although they didn't focus solely on Brian, the husband, investigators took a closer look at Solciret's entire family-in-law. And then, a new element emerged. When the new prosecutor requested Solciret's cell phone records from the telephone company, the finding was conclusive. All the messages sent after her disappearance, the ones where she supposedly said she was fine and just needed a few days for herself, had originated from the same place, the house where she lived with Brian's family. The prosecution expanded the investigation and requested the geolocation of the phones of everyone living there. They discovered another disturbing fact. Kevin's cell phone, the brother-in-law's, registered movements to a distant location on several occasions, starting the day after Solciret's disappearance. It was also learned that Solciret's phone had been turned on in the districts of Cercado de Lima and Miraflores weeks after she went missing. The analysis revealed that the SIM card had been removed from her device and used in another cell phone, from which her parents were contacted. The call report showed that between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock p.m., on August 23, 2016, Kevin received 4 calls from Andrea while he was in Miraflores, and then he headed back to the house. But Andrea was not the only one who contacted him. At 3:30 and 3:32 p.m., he also spoke with his mother. The investigation revealed that it was Andrea who had removed the SIM card from Solciret's phone and had kept the device in her possession ever since. On October 21, 2016, posing as Solciret, she called the phone operator to cancel the line. This conversation, lasting approximately 2 minutes, was recorded. A forensic voice analysis confirmed that the voice was not Solciret's, but Andrea's. With all the evidence gathered, the police now had enough to act. In January 2020, a judge ordered the preliminary detention of Andrea and Kevin. The arrests were carried out on February 14th. She was detained in Lima and he in Ancash. Both were taken to the police station for questioning. During the initial hours, both clung fiercely to their original story. They insisted they did not know where Solciret was. They repeated that she had left of her own free will and had abandoned her children. Faced with this, investigators decided to focus their pressure on Andrea. They intensified the interrogation, and at a pivotal moment they played her a recording of her own voice, canceling Solciret's phone line. It was then that Andrea finally broke and began to speak. She recounted that on the day of the disappearance, Solciret had arrived at the house around 1 in the afternoon. She locked herself in the room she shared with her children and Brian. Months later, the youngest daughter began to cry and scream because, according to Andrea, her mother was hitting her. Andrea said she knocked on the door and confronted Sol. This caused Sol to leave the house, extremely upset. A few minutes later, the young woman returned. Andrea was already in her own room when she heard her come back. She came out and warned Sol not to hit the children again. This sparked a heated argument. According to Andrea, she went back to her room to avoid further trouble, but Sol began to pound on the door insistently. Andrea said she was afraid of what might happen. Finally, she gave in and threw the door open with force. The impact, she claimed, struck Sol in the arm and face, causing her to stumble back into the bathroom. Andrea insisted the floor was slippery and that Sol fell backward, hitting her head. She stared at her for a few minutes, waiting for her to react, but when she realized Sol wasn't moving, panic set in. That's when she called Kevin. Kevin arrived at the house quickly. He told Andrea to stay in the living room with Solciret's 2 children and then disappeared for several hours. When he returned, he had just showered and was holding a knife. Andrea asked him what he had done. His response was chilling. He had done something terrible to hide what had happened to Sol. He explained that he had left part of the evidence at his parents' house and had taken the rest to another location to hide it. Andrea claimed she never knew exactly where that other part ended up. What she did reveal was that for months, certain objects related to the case remained in the bathroom, inside a plastic container, while others were kept hidden behind a piece of furniture. After Solciret's death, Kevin instructed Andrea to send messages from Sol's phone to avoid raising suspicion. And so, she herself wrote and sent texts to the young woman's family, pretending she was alive and far from home. When questioned about the involvement of others, especially Brian, Andrea denied he had anything to do with what happened. Following Andrea's confession, Kevin tried to change the direction of the investigation. He portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance and accused Andrea of having planned the murder, claiming his own innocence. According to his version, he had carried on a secret relationship with Solciret between 20 and 20, and when Andrea found out, she planned to kill her. He said that on the day after his sister-in-law's disappearance, he left early to go to his studies. However, phone records and geolocation data contradicted him. Investigators confirmed that he had been in the area of the sewer system in the early morning hours, the same place where it was suspected parts of the body had been disposed of. The renovations made to the family's apartment, including replacing the floors and painting the walls, were no coincidence. It was all part of a plan to erase any trace that Solciret's body had been dismembered there. At that moment, authorities still couldn't confirm if Brian had participated in the crime. But after Andrea's confession, the police took her to the residence to verify her story. The scene was chilling. In the bathroom, inside a container, they found key elements for the investigation. In Andrea's closet, police found other pieces of evidence. Everything was immediately collected and sent to the forensic lab for analysis. A psychological evaluation of Andrea revealed a narcissistic profile, with an inflated self-esteem and a belief that she was superior to others. The report also noted that she kept Solciret's remains as a way of continuing to exert control over her. Even after death, Rosario, a family member of the victim, denounced the public ministry, stating they had been robbed of more than 3 years without answers, with a case that passed through the hands of at least 2 prosecutors who failed to do their jobs. Carlos Moran, the Minister of the Interior at the time, met with the parents and asked for forgiveness on behalf of the state for the negligence and insensitivity with which the case was handled. It was also recalled that in the early days of the disappearance, the then Minister Carlos Basombrio was in charge of the interior portfolio when everything was still uncertain. The director of the National Police of Peru, José Luis Lavalle, revealed shocking details. The investigation determined that Solciret had suffered an attack of great violence, caused by a blunt object. This act caused severe injuries to her face and head. Forensic analysis determined that the blow was frontal, directly to the face, damaging the central part of her nose. These findings demolished Andrea's version of events, in which she maintained that Saul died from an accidental fall after hitting her head. They also dismissed the alleged motive that she acted in defense of Saul's children due to supposed abuse. Laval warned that both Brian and other members of his family were being investigated as possible accomplices in the crime of concealment and obstruction of justice. He explained that after expanding the tracking of calls, a pattern of suspicious communications was discovered. On August 23, 2016, at 3:32 in the afternoon, Yolanda, the twins' mother, received a call from Andrea. This time coincided exactly with the moment when, according to the investigation, Kevin was manipulating key evidence related to Solciret's case in the bathroom of his home. Right after speaking with Andrea, Yolanda called Kevin and then immediately called Brian. Then she repeated the calls to both of them in the same order. For the homicide division, this exchange could not be a coincidence. It fit the hypothesis that the entire family was aware and possibly involved in what happened that day. A constant flow of calls was registered on Yolanda's cell phone after she communicated with Andrea. Among the contacts were her sons and even their father. According to the reconstruction of events, the youngest son, Franco, arrived at the home around 4 in the afternoon, while the dismemberment of Solciret's body was still underway. Hours later, around 7:30 in the evening, Brian entered the family home. With this data, the public ministry and the prosecutor's office began to consider that not only Andrea and Kevin might be involved, but also Yolanda, Brian, and Franco. The hypothesis was that the mother and her 3 sons had played an active role in the crime. Furthermore, the body had been handled with extreme care, which reinforced the idea that more than one person participated in the dismemberment. Specialists pointed out another disturbing detail. Even though years had passed since the murder, the place where the remains were found had no foul odor, which indicated that deliberate measures had been taken for their preservation. Hours later, the pre-trial detention hearing was held in the 4th Permanent Preparatory Investigation Court of the Court of Callao, under the direction of Judge Roberto Zucno. The prosecutor requested 9 months of pre-trial detention for Andrea and Kevin, accusing them of the crime of qualified homicide against Solciret. On November 10th, in a virtual hearing, the court extended Andrea and Kevin's pre-trial detention to 16 months, while the oral trial was being developed. 4 months later, in March 2021, a reconstruction of the crime was carried out, led by the Deputy Provincial Prosecutor Laura Raquel Correa Marreros. It took place in the same Callao residence where everything happened, with investigators participating to stage how Solciret died. The public ministry's hypothesis was clear. In the midst of a heated argument, Andrea assaulted Sol, causing her to fall to the ground and lose her life. Then, according to the investigation, Andrea and Kevin manipulated and concealed evidence, using various objects. Some items were eliminated while others remained hidden and were located later during the investigation. Afterward, they contacted both Brian and their mother, as well as Franco, the younger brother, and began the renovations in the house. They sanded and painted the walls, replaced the floor, and eliminated any trace of blood. When luminol tests were conducted at the time, nothing was found, precisely because everything had been altered. Everything indicated that the cover-up was part of a calculated plan to erase any trace of Solciret's murder. On February 28, the Preparatory Investigation Court of Callao determined that the evidence presented met the legal requirements and authorized the process to continue, thus opening the oral trial stage. The trial began on March 4th. However, only 8 sessions were scheduled until June, despite the public ministry's request for greater frequency, since the pre-trial detention period for the accused was set to expire on May 12th. On May 17th, the court ordered the release of Andrea and Kevin, imposing restricted appearance on them. The decision was made because, by that date, their pre-trial detention period, which had extended for a total of 25 months, had expired. In a press conference, the case prosecutor assured that in the hearings of April 21st and 27th, they had formally requested that continuous sessions with more hours be scheduled, and that this request was recorded in the audio files. However, the court's response was to shift the responsibility to the public ministry. The trial for the murder of Solciret continued on Wednesday, May 18th, with a tense exchange between the prosecutor and the presiding judge, who questioned the work of the public ministry during the time the accused were in pretrial detention. On June 3rd, the long-awaited verdict arrived. Kevin Villanueva was sentenced to 30 years in prison for the crime of femicide, while Andrea received a sentence of 28 years for aggravated homicide in the case of Solciret. The judge, Gladys Diaz, also ordered that both jointly pay 80 sols, approximately $20.50, as civil reparation to the victim's family. Brian Villanueva and Yolanda Isabel Castillo Garcia were declared co-authors of the crime of real concealment and sentenced to 3 years and 4 months of effective prison. In addition to paying 6 sols, about $1.50 to the Peruvian state. What do you think was the most unjust part of this entire investigation process? Do you think the sentences against the accused were severe enough? We want to know your opinion. Let us know in the comments.